So hello everyone and welcome. Thank you all for coming. And thank you to Scott and the Down to Earth crew for inviting me here today. My name is Jonas and I'm very excited to be here today to talk with you about psychedelics. I assume that if you're here today, you have an interest in working with psychedelics, and that's great. The path of healing through psychedelics can be greatly rewarding. However, choosing to work with these medicines should only be done after carefully thinking it through. As well as tremendous potential, they also carry inherent risk. And my intention for today is to help you get clarity in whether psychedelics is for you, and also how to get the most out of working with them if you decide to do so. So I am a psychedelic explorer and facilitator. I'm also an ADAPT certified health coach at the Kresser Institute. And I help people who are passionate about self-optimization to achieve deep and lasting transformation through the use of psychedelics by helping them prepare for, navigate, and integrate the transformational power of psychedelics into daily life. Can anyone hear me okay, even back there? Yeah, great. So I've had an intimate relationship with psychedelics for 10 years, since my first experience with psilocybin mushrooms in Thailand, 2012. And I had this experience when I was in a very dark place mentally. I used to suffer from these cycles of anxiety and depression. And at the time of my trip to Thailand, I was currently in one of the deepest depressions of my life. And I almost canceled the trip because I was in such a bad state. But after a lot of persuasion from my friend, who I booked the trip together with, I decided to go. And after 2 weeks of partying, I think it was for 17 days, constantly, every day, in different parts of Thailand, we landed on the island of Koh Phangan. And Koh Phangan is quite famous for the happy shakes that you have there. And this is a milkshake that is made with magic mushrooms that grow on the island. And I'd heard about these shakes before, and I was kind of curious to try one. So one day when I was walking back to the hotel from the beach with my friend, I saw this little juice shack on the side of the road. And they had this colorfully painted mushroom on the bar. We stopped and I asked the girl behind the bar, do you have mushroom shakes? And as they say, the rest is history. So, I mean, the image is not great, but what you're seeing here is me, and there's the colorfully painted mushroom. Having my first sip of the shake that would change my life. So for a few hours that evening, under the influence of the mushrooms, I realized that a different life was possible. For one day, I got a break from my depression, and I saw the world in a way I'd never seen it before. It was a world that was just full of magic, wonder, and beauty. And I remember there was one moment when I was standing down at the beach with my friend, and I was feeling the waves just coming in over my feet. And I was just standing there, and I was in complete awe with creation. I was just looking at the palm trees, the water, the sand, other people, and it was so much, I just felt there was so much beauty. It was almost too much beauty to comprehend. And there, in a moment of silence and presence, everything made sense. There was nothing to worry about. And I might say it sounds strange for someone who haven't had a psychedelic experience, but it was just this, everything is okay. I have nothing to fear. Nothing to be depressed about, nothing to worry about. And it was the first time that I can remember of having experienced complete presence. I'm sure I did it as a kid, but as an adult, I'd never had that experience of just presence and silence. And I felt happy, and I was genuinely happy, a happiness that came from deep within myself. And up until that moment, I had this idea that happiness was something to be pursued. But what I realized then was the happiness was already within me. It was just waiting to be uncovered. So my life took a completely different direction after that experience. The experience showed me what was possible for my life, and I've been relentlessly committed to self-discovery and improvement ever since. Since that moment, psychedelics have been at the core of my transformation and growth, and it's in many ways shaped me into the person I am today. But I've also experienced the dark side of psychedelics. After an ayahuasca retreat in 2018 in Peru, I had a nervous breakdown. One of the ayahuasca experiences had brought some deeply rooted fears and traumas to the surface to be seen and transformed. For 3-4 months after the experience, I was in a deep existential crisis, and it took me almost 2 years to fully process and integrate the experience. During those 2 years, I didn't lose my faith and conviction in the transformational power of psychedelics. Quite the contrary. As I could see, I went through so much transformation and shifts, and I emerged on the other side as a changed man. It did, however, teach me to have a tremendous amount of respect for them and the importance of proper preparation, navigation, and integration. And as I was going through that experience, my passion for helping others to navigate working with psychedelics started to emerge. I wanted to create for others what I felt was missing for me during my journey. What started for me with a mushroom shake in Copenhagen for a bit of fun has turned into a deep passion for psychedelic medicine, and I've come to dedicate my life to sharing the psychedelic experience in a safe and transformative way. You'll hear me refer to psychedelics as medicine throughout the presentation, because that's what I truly believe that they are medicine in the truest sense, that it can help us to heal permanently and not just put a band-aid on like so many of the modern medicine does. And I believe that psychedelics can change the world for the better. When properly used, they have the potential to heal and transform us, and ultimately to bring positive change to society and the world as a whole. So that's why I'm here today, to help you to navigate the psychedelic experience and help you to integrate these powerful medicines into your life in a safe and transformative way that supports your growth, health, and well-being. So over the next 40-45 minutes, we'll be covering everything from safety, different substances to use, how to prepare for and integrate the psychedelic experience, microdosing, and much more. In the end, we will have a Q&A, so please save any questions for them. And a short disclaimer before we start the presentation. I do not have any medical training, and what I'm going to share today is not in any way medical advice. This presentation is not meant to promote the use of psychedelics. It's purely educational, and my aim is to inform you on how to use them in a safe way if you decide to do so. I don't believe that psychedelics are for everyone, and using a psychedelic substance might carry legal and personal risk. So I encourage you to do your own research before using any of the substances we're talking about today. Okay. So what are psychedelics? There are numerous substances that are classed as psychedelics. I'm going to focus on the so-called classic psychedelics in this presentation. And these are psilocybin mushrooms, LSD, ayahuasca, huachuma, which is also called San Pedro, and peyote. Every substance has a certain flavor to it in terms of what this experience is like. But regardless of substance, it is a very similar experience, and the way to prepare for and navigate and integrate is transferable to all of the substances, except for ayahuasca, which requires certain dietary preparations. So let's start with psilocybin mushrooms. It's one of the substances that have been used by humans for the longest part, as part of religious ceremony and rituals. It's gained a lot of mainstream over the last few years, partly because of recent studies suggesting that it can help with several mental health issues such as depression, anxiety disorders, addictions, and OCD. It's often viewed as a recreational drug, but when used with intention in a ceremonial setting can be deeply healing. In traditional cultures, mushrooms are called the little children. The experience that usually lasts for 4 to 6 hours is often quite playful, and the teachings tend to be delivered in a friendly way. The experience has an earthy, organic feel to it, and there is often a strong urge to be outside. immersed in nature for at least part of the experience. And in my opinion, mushrooms are a great option for anyone who's new to psychedelics and wants to start exploring. Then we have LSD, which is popularly known as acid. That was first discovered by Swiss chemist Albert Hofmann in 1943. It's a man-made chemical that is derived from a fungus called ergot. It's a clear liquid that's usually dropped on a small piece of paper called a tab or a blotter. And LSD was heavily researched in the 50s and 60s and showed a lot of promise in the mental health field. However, this research was halted in 1970 when LSD was made illegal in most parts of the world. It's another substance that is mostly known as a recreational drug, but just like mushrooms, can be very therapeutic when used properly. LSD usually lasts for up to 12 hours, so that's like twice the duration of mushrooms. Next we have ayahuasca, which is a DMT containing brew that has been used for at least a millennia in the Amazon rainforest by traditional cultures there, probably longer, and it's considered sacred medicine in these cultures. And DMT is really interesting because it's found all over nature. It's even found within the human body. But scientists are currently unclear of its function in the body. Some speculate that it's secreted by the pineal gland when we dream, for example, to create a visionary state of dreams. But no one really knows. But it's an incredibly powerful psychedelic, and it requires extensive preparation around diet, medication, and certain medical conditions. An ayahuasca experience usually lasts between 2 to 6 hours and often involves purging, throwing up, or getting well as the indigenous people look at it. Ayahuasca can be profoundly healing on many different levels, but it's very strong medicine, and my recommendation is to work with ayahuasca exclusively in ceremonial settings. It's becoming more common for people to kind of buy the ingredients online and make their own ayahuasca at home, either to sell or to host their own ceremonies. And I would strongly advise against consuming it in this way, because it's a medicine that carries such a long tradition of how it's supposed to be used. And the shamans train for years and years and years. And there's often lineages of shamans who perform the ceremonies. Next we have San Pedro, which is also called Huachuma. And it's a mescaline-containing cactus native to the Andes region in South America. It's been used by indigenous cultures for thousands of years as sacred medicine. The most common way that San Pedro is consumed is in a ceremonial setting, taking place during daytime, outside in nature. Often a big part of the ceremony is spent walking. A San Pedro experience, which usually lasts between 6 to 12 hours, is often quite gentle compared to other psychedelics. And this makes it a good substance for any novice psychedelic users as well. If ayahuasca can be described as very feminine, chaotic energy, San Pedro is more of a grounding, centered cactus energy. Like it really has that feel that is nice and grounding. Whereas ayahuasca can be just complete chaos. Next we have peyote, which is another mescaline-containing cactus that grows in northern Mexico and southern Texas. And again, it's been used by Native Americans for thousands of years for spiritual purposes. And it's often used in these cultures to treat alcohol and other drug addictions. Its effect is very similar to San Pedro, but the experience is usually a little bit stronger. Peyote is a very slow-growing cactus, and because of over-harvesting, it's become endangered. So San Pedro, which grows much faster and is widely cultivated, is a more sustainable option. Some other worthy mentions is iboga, which is a shrub that is native to Western Africa. And it's gained attention recently because it's so effective in treating opiate and other addictions. Then we have ketamine. again, it's become appreciated over the last years as a treatment for depression, and there's many ketamine clinics opening all over the world. And then we have MDMA, which is technically not a psychedelic, but it has some psychedelic effect. And clinical trials have shown amazing results in treatment of PTSD, and it's actually on its way to become legal medicine to be prescribed for therapeutic use. So how have psychedelics been used historically? As mentioned, humans have been consuming psychedelics for thousands of years for healing and part of spiritual ritual. But in more recent history, LSD, after its discovery, soon became of interest in the medical field and was extensively researched in the 50s and 60s. And in the 60s, psychedelics hit the mainstream and contributed to the birth of the counterculture hippie movement. A whole music genre was developing around the use of psychedelic drugs. So Jimi Hendrix, the Beatles, the Doors are all examples of music that was inspired by the psychedelic experience. The spreading use of psychedelics subsequently became, or was perceived anyway, as a threat to governments, especially in the US, where it was deeply associated with the anti-war movement towards the war in Vietnam. So in 1970, psychedelics were made illegal in the US, and United Nations, all the countries in the United Nations followed closely after. Criminalization, however, did not stop the use of psychedelics, but it did push its use underground, and a lot of the promising research stopped. What we're experiencing now is a re-emergence of the psychedelics into the mainstream. Psychedelics are gaining the interest from the mental health field, as well from spiritual explorers, entrepreneurs, creatives, and biohackers. So why are we seeing this increased interest in the use of psychedelics? What are some benefits? The main reasons that people work with psychedelics are healing and therapeutic use, personal growth, spiritual exploration, entrepreneurship, and creativity. Let's explore these areas one by one. The increased acceptance and embracing of psychedelics over recent years mainly comes from their ability to heal. Whether it be spiritual, mental, emotional, energetic, all of these aspects of our being are connected, and psychedelics can heal and realign us on a profound level. Psychedelic therapy has, can you guys see what it says at all? Yeah. So psychedelic therapy has been proven effective in treating depression, anxiety, PTSD, OCD, existential distress and end-of-life anxiety, and chronic pain. An experience with psilocybin mushrooms or ayahuasca, for example, is often likened to several years of therapy in a few hours. I want to share a story about chronic pain. For 15 years, I used to have quite severe lower back pain. It would vary in intensity. Sometimes I wouldn't feel much of it at all, and other times I would have to call in sick from work because I was in so much pain. And yeah, this would go on and on for years. I would go to different doctors. No one could do anything. They just prescribed strong painkillers, and that was it. And this was up until 4 years ago, when me and my wife had, then girlfriend, we had planned to have a mushroom ceremony. And I was apprehensive about doing the ceremony because it was at a period when I was having really bad back pain. But I decided to do it anyway. I just prepared the space really nice so I would be comfortable. And I remember after having taken the mushrooms, I started getting all the mushroom visuals, all the classic stuff. And then it just went dark and all the visuals stopped, and I could literally feel the energy and the energy and my intention going into my lower back where the pain was. And it was like someone was taking my arm and started doing this, like really hard, but on my lower back. And it was such tremendous pain. And I just started crying. And I was crying for 50 minutes to an hour. I've never cried like that in my entire life. It was from the bottom of my being. I was just weeping, crying. and I could literally feel how something was leaving my lower back as this was happening. And immediately after that experience, my back pain was reduced by 80%. And I still don't have a great back. I have flare-ups that sometimes happen where it's a little bit painful, but it's in no way close to how it was before that experience. And that really just made me question, well, I mean, everything of what I knew about pain and emotions. And it really just opened my eyes to, wow, the mind-body connection. So, yeah, anyway. Another area where psychedelics really shine is in personal growth and its potential to bring on behavior change. They can be very beneficial when we're trying to break old habits and form new, healthier patterns of behavior. Psychedelics can provide unique insight into who we are and why we are the way that we are. Without getting too sciencey, I do want to explain a little bit how psychedelics can support the process of personal growth. Our brains are plastic, which means that they can change and adapt. And early in life, our brain is more open and adaptable. And over the years, our brain tends to get more rigid. Anything we do, our brain will adapt to become better at that. And it doesn't discriminate between negative and positive thoughts and action. Anytime we think a thought or perform an action, it strengthens that neural pattern, making it easier to perform it the next time. And this, it works like an autopilot, which helps us to preserve energy. And this is good if we want to learn to play an instrument or drive a car, but it becomes problematic when we've developed patterns that aren't serving us anymore. So for example, if our early years were unsupportive in any way, our ego had to develop workarounds to get us through the painful period or whatever it was. With significant, deep, early and or chronic traumas, the workarounds that we develop are wired tightly into the oldest part of our ego, and they often go unchallenged for most of our life, even if they're profoundly unhealthy or destructive. And these workarounds become deeply embedded patterns that play and repeat over and over and over. A psychedelic experience, when done properly, can help to loosen the rigidity of the mind. I've heard a psychedelic experience be described as fresh snow falling on a skiing mountain, covering the old, deeply embedded tracks and opening up the possibility to see and take another way. Allowing us to make conscious choices rather than being completely absorbed in subconscious programming and, yeah, those behaviors. And it's a sort of rewiring of the brain. It's estimated that 90% of our thoughts are subconscious programming. Just like an iceberg where you can only see a small part of the iceberg, the same is true for our mind, where we can only a little bit of our mind is visible to us. A psychedelic experience can expose more of the iceberg, helping us to see what is getting in the way of us making the changes we want to make, to becoming the person we want to become. I like it to how it's almost like the water is just subsiding when we take a psychedelic, exposing more of the iceberg. Another reason that psychedelics are making their way into the mainstream is because the increased interest in spiritual exploration. And as mentioned earlier, psychedelics have been used for thousands of years for this purpose, for spiritual evolution and consciousness development, as a way to connect to the divine. They can enable us to connect in a deeper way with life. By increasing self-knowledge and awareness, we can begin to understand our true nature and who we really are at the deepest level, beyond our ego construct and name and identity. And just like an astronomer would use a telescope to look into the cosmos, psychedelics are a tool for us to look inwards into our mind and consciousness. psychedelics can reveal that there's so much more to the mystery of life and that everything in existence is profoundly interconnected. In a study at Johns Hopkins University, patients that were diagnosed with terminal cancers were given psilocybin to help them with their existential distress. And in this study, 2/3 of the people had a mystical transcendent experience, and through that experience they lost their fear of dying. 2/3 of these people who were in so much pain and fear for what was about to come. And I can speak to this myself. I used to suffer from severe death anxiety before I started working with psychedelics. But through my work with psychedelics, I have transcended that fear. And of course, there is always a little bit of unknowing, and I don't want to die, but I don't have the fear of death anymore. And that's been such a liberating feeling. I remember one time I was driving when I was living in Sweden on the motorway, and I just had a panic attack from, shit, I'm going to die one day. And I had to get out of the car, and I had a proper panic attack. And that used to happen quite often for me, those kind of attacks. And that's gone. It doesn't exist for me anymore. So that's been a big liberation. Psychedelics are also increasingly being used by entrepreneurs and creatives. They can greatly contribute to the increased flow and productivity, especially through microdosing. Psychedelics cause parts of the brain that usually don't communicate to do so, and this can help with increased creativity, problem solving, and outside-the-box thinking. Now, I've been sharing a lot of the benefits and positive effects of psychedelics, but there are some things to consider when thinking about using these substances. Generally, psychedelics are incredibly safe. They're not addictive, quite the opposite, as psychedelics can help to break addictions, as I mentioned. But they aren't without risk. Psychedelics can be described as non-specific catalysts and amplifiers of the psyche, meaning that they will amplify whatever is going on in our mind. This can be very transformative if experienced in a safe, held space. But if experienced in the wrong setting, it can be traumatic and might even do psychological harm. People with diagnosed mental disorders should be extra cautious when working with psychedelics. Schizophrenics or people with a risk of schizophrenia, people with a history of psychosis, probably do better in avoiding them altogether. However, this is an area where we have a different view on mental health in the West as what they have in traditional cultures. And it's not as black and white as we can sometimes make it seem. But yeah, I encourage anyone who have any kind of mental instability to really be careful and think things through and start small, if anything, with these substances. But like I said, I mean, I have had quite severe mental instability myself and have, through the use of psychedelics, transcended that. So again, it's not black and white. But if you decide that you want to explore psychedelics, what is the best way to do it? I don't believe that psychedelics always have to be serious business and only be used when we have an issue or as a last resort when other types of therapy has failed. Psychedelics can, in my opinion, be used for recreation, and a lot of healing and growth can come from just having a good time. But that being said, they should always be used with reverence and intention. And generally, the higher the dose, the more important it becomes to use them in a safe and held space. For most people, I recommend to working together with a guide, a coach, or a facilitator, especially if you're just starting out to work with these medicines. And the deeper you want to go, the more important it becomes to have guidance and support. And although I don't condemn the recreational use of psychedelics, I believe that they have so much more to offer. And I have a feeling that if you're sitting here today, you have an interest in using psychedelics for personal growth in a more meaningful way than just recreationally. And that's what I want to focus on in this presentation, how to use them intentionally for healing, growth, and transformation. I believe that the starting point to successfully working with psychedelics begins with getting really clear on why you're wanting to work with them. Is it for healing? What do you want to heal and why? Is it for spiritual exploration, personal growth, entrepreneurship, creativity? Asking these questions beforehand is a powerful way to create a direction. And any change we want to make in life begins with a vision of something to be different. So maybe you can just ask yourself this question for a moment. Why am I here today? What do I believe psychedelics can help me with? Now, some important questions to ask once you've gotten clear on your why for working with psychedelics are you ready to put in the work and not expect the medicine to do all the work for you? Are you ready to face parts of yourself that you have been suppressing or old traumas? Are you ready to take responsibility for your life? Full responsibility. If the answer is no to any of these questions, you might want to reconsider if psychedelics are right for you at this point. Do you have support in starting this journey? And if not, how can you get the help that you need? And once you've gotten really clear on your why and you feel ready to do the work that comes with that, what's the next step? What's the best approach for you? Let's talk about two different approaches, microdosing and macrodosing in a ceremonial setting. So microdosing versus macrodosing, or high dose, can be described or compared to scuba diving versus snorkeling. Let's imagine your mind being like the sea, and you normally just live on land. Sometimes you can peek into the water and maybe you manage to see something below the surface. Taking microdose is like putting on the goggles and the snorkel and jumping into the water. And all of a sudden, a whole new world's open up. And you can observe things that you couldn't observe on the surface. And as you would notice fish swimming below you, you might notice a thought or pattern that leads to certain behavior. When you take a macrodose, it's like putting on the scuba diving gear and diving down to deeper depths than what you can explore or observe from the surface. Let's first talk a little bit about microdosing. What is microdosing? It can be described as integrating small doses of a psychedelic substance into daily life with a specific purpose or intention. The dose is small enough that you will not experience classic psychedelic effects like visual distortions or out-of-body experience, any of that stuff. And the common dose is usually 1/10 of an active dose. Microdosing is a gentle approach. It's a good way to get introduced to psychedelics and build confidence. It can be incorporated into daily life and enhance your everyday experience. And naturally, it's usually not as rapidly transforming as a high-dose experience. But when working with microdosing over an extended period of time, a lot of transformation and healing can happen. Why do people microdose? Microdosing has many different applications. For example, general life enhancement. Life simply seems to be better when we're microdose, lived more in the present moment. Mental health wellness. And this is an area that is becoming increasingly popular for managing anxiety, depression, PTSD, ADHD, ADD, and to aid in personal development and learning. Microdosing can help us gain a deeper understanding of ourselves, assist spiritual awakening in practice, and help us to shift patterns and behaviors that are no longer serving us. The most commonly used substances for microdosing are psilocybin mushrooms and LSD. And the effects are very similar, but a very broad generalization is that mushrooms really shine when the intention is personal growth and spiritual development. And LSD is it's quite energetic and uplifting, and it's suitable for analytical thinking and high productivity. But something to consider is that LSD interacts with the dopamine receptors. And this is probably where it's making it more extroverted and energetic than mushrooms, but it's also taxing on the dopaminergic system. And I don't recommend using LSD more than 2 times per week for that reason. How often should you microdose? Firstly, do not microdose daily. By not microdosing daily, we avoid building tolerance, and actually often the following day after having had a microdose is more beneficial than the actual microdosing day for whatever reason. A good starting point is to microdose every 3 days or 2 times per week. Microdose for 1 to 3 months and then break for 2 to 4 weeks to reset tolerance and evaluate the experience. Moving on to macrodosing or full dose experience. A ceremonial high dose experience can be deeply profound and life-changing. It's a deep dive into the psyche to go to the root of what's holding you back in life and transform it. It might bring a lot of subconscious material to the surface to be and reveal unresolved trauma. And like I mentioned earlier, it can sometimes be like 2 years of therapy in a few hours. A high enough dose will dissolve the ego and expose a unity beyond words. It can be extremely transformative and at the same time disruptive. And a deep dive like this requires proper preparation and integration. If done incorrectly, a powerful psychedelic experience can be disorienting and even harmful to the psyche. So how can you ensure that you are properly prepared for an experience like this? Preparation is important for anyone who wants to get the most out of a high-dose experience, and absolutely crucial for anyone with mental instability. Let's go back to the analogy of scuba diving. What happened there? Okay, yeah. So if you've never done scuba diving and you decide to buy some scuba diving gear on eBay and you head out by yourself to do a 40-meter dive, the risk is it's quite a big risk of things going wrong. And the same is true for working with psychedelics. Without proper preparation, the risk of having a negative experience and even causing psychological harm increases. By properly preparing, you ensure that you minimize the risks and also create a container of safety and confidence that will allow you to go deeper into the experience and get the most out of it. Psychedelics work on both mind and body, and frankly, there's no separation between the two. They're both part of an integrated whole and influence each other profoundly, as the experience I was telling you about earlier, about the back pain. So it's therefore important to have an holistic approach to the preparatory process. And there are some practices and tools that can really help to deepen the process and accelerate transformation. I can recommend to taking the opportunity to place extra focus on looking after your mind and body in the weeks leading up to a psychedelic experience. Nourish yourself with healthy food, movement, and sleep. Avoid junk food and intoxicants. Be mindful of your work-life balance. Surround yourself with positive, high vibrational people that are going to be supportive of your process. And some medicine require dietary preparations, and these should be communicated beforehand by any serious facilitators. And if you've booked an ayahuasca ceremony or retreat and they don't communicate these things, I would see that as a big red flag that they shouldn't be facilitating these experiences. The first practice I recommend in incorporating in preparation is journaling. Journaling is a great way to prepare for a journey. It helps you to see what's on your mind. It's an effective tool to kind of spring clean and which can reduce clutter and set the stage for a more profound experience. It's also a great way to process any nervousness, hesitation, or resistance. Next, we have meditation. The benefits of meditation are numerous. Reduced stress, improved sleep, improved mental health, just to mention a few. But on top of this, a psychedelic experience is in many ways like an extended meditation session. Establishing a meditation practice and getting used to that space before is a great way to kind of train the mind to let go in the psychedelic experience, and can be a very valuable tool. Moving on to yoga. In traditional yoga, asanas or postures are used to prepare the body for meditation and receiving higher consciousness. Yoga releases tension and makes us more flexible both in mind and body. Developing a yoga routine throughout the process of preparation is a great way to keep you grounded and connected to your center. Another very powerful practice in preparation is breathwork. Breathwork helps to regulate the nervous system and calms and grounds the mind and body. And the breathwork experience can create a similar altered state to that of psychedelics, and the experience in itself can often be quite psychedelics, with full-blown visions and trauma releases. It helps to, like I said, release the trauma, stored emotions, which in itself is incredibly powerful, but also sets the stage for the psychedelic medicine to go deeper. So if we do this work beforehand on the body to release tension and emotions, the psychedelics can go, straight go in deep and do the work on a more mental level. Examples of breathwork practices that go well together with psychedelics are holotropic breathing and rebirth breath, sometimes called conscious connected breath. For breathwork, and these practices are often done in a ceremonial setting, and I recommend doing it with a trained facilitator. For breath practices at home, Wim Hof is a good option. As well as these structured practices, I also recommend to cultivate a relationship with your breath through meditation or simply mindful breath awareness in your daily life. It's a tool that is always available to us to bring a sense of calm and grounding. And in the psychedelic experience, if things get overwhelming, it can be very powerful to just, come back to the breath and ground the experience and come back into the body. The next step in preparation is intention. Intention setting is very important before a psychedelic journey. It will help you to gain clarity on your motivations for having a psychedelic journey and also set the course of the journey. So what is an intention? An intention can be something serious like understanding the root of our depression or anxiety. But it can also be something lighter, like how can I find more joy in my everyday experience? And it's important to, wow, it's really bright now. It's important to set an intention, but then to release any expectations connected to that. One of the keys to working with psychedelics is to let go of control and relaxing into the wisdom of the medicine and the knowing that you'll have the experience you're meant to be having. And being overly focused on your preset intentions can sometimes close you off to other meaningful themes or surprises. Now it's really difficult to see, but yeah. And also I would say be careful what you wish for when it comes to intention setting. I generally believe that we always get in a psychedelic experience what we can handle, but we do have to be cautious when setting our intention. So if our intention is to go into some unresolved trauma, for example, we want to make sure that the ceremonial space is safe and properly held, and that we have time and support afterwards to process what might be brought up and not have to jump into a busy period of work the next day. And like I mentioned, for most people, I recommend to only use psychedelics in a held space with experienced guides and facilitators, especially when using higher doses. But if you decide to take psychedelics by yourself or with a friend, there are some tips that I want to share to make the journey as safe and transformative as possible. First, for your environment, ideal would be to have your experience outside, immersed in nature, or at least have access to a nice nature area close where you can go that is not too frequented with other people. But a day outside spent hiking is perfect. If you do it indoors, make sure that the space is comfortable and prepare areas beforehand where you can sit or lie down and maybe do some yoga, have a yoga mat available. Wear comfortable clothes and either have layers you can take on or off or have a blanket available. It's quite common to alternate between feeling hot and cold. Set aside a whole day for your experience, ideally 3 days even, but at least a whole day, where you don't have any plans afterwards. You don't want to have to rush away or cut the experience short and rush away to dinner with a friend or something. When you're still in the experience, you want to have your time afterwards to just do whatever you feel would be supportive for you. Make people who might contact you during the day aware that you will be unavailable and turn off your phone. But it's important to make people aware so that in the experience you're not, oh shit, I didn't tell my girlfriend or whatever, and they might be contacting me, and that can cause a lot of anxiety. Prepare music beforehand. Instrumental, soft music is often preferable. Oftentimes lyrics can be a bit disorienting and kind of steer the trip, so you want to have kind of neutral music. Prepare food beforehand to have ready during your experience. Keep it healthy, fresh fruit, maybe a salad. Some people like chocolate towards the end of the experience. Make sure you have plenty of water available. Have your journal available for note-taking before, during, and after. Some people also like to create art, so it can be nice to have some colors and things. And make it into a ceremony. Do a little bit of yoga meditation beforehand. Tune into your intentions and journal on what you're hoping to get out of the day and how you're feeling. And in terms of what dose to take, again, the higher the dose, the more important it becomes to have guidance and support. If you're completely new to psychedelics and you're planning to have a solo experience, I would recommend a gentle dose of 0.25 to 0.3 grams of mushrooms. And this is just over a microdose, basically. I would say half a gram maximum. If you have some experience, I wouldn't recommend going over 1 gram of mushrooms, at least until you've really gotten familiar with the space and know that you can hold your own space. But I would say, if you're new, start small. There's no rush. If you've waited all of this time, you can take your time and build your way up and build your confidence. So what is a high-dose experience like? The psychedelic experience is notoriously hard to explain. Every experience is highly subjective and personal. Every journey is different. And be prepared to be surprised. Your journey could involve a vast range of thoughts, feelings, visions, and/or bodily sensations. Your perception of time might change completely. Time might cease to exist. Sometimes in ceremony, you might experience purging. This can be in the form of shaking, crying, coughing, yawning, and with ayahuasca, vomiting is quite common. You might experience visual distortions and beautiful cascading geometric forms and colors. Intense visions, both pleasant and disturbing. And with higher doses, it's quite common to experience ego dissolution, where your sense of self gets blurred and you feel like you're merging with the world. You might relive trauma, known or unknown. You might have to take a look at parts of yourself that you've been suppressing. And trying to avoid this can pose bigger problems than it solves. If you don't explore the shadow, it doesn't disappear, it becomes stronger. And there is a saying, what you resist persists, and that's very true in psychedelics. So how do you navigate if any difficulties arise during your experience? Observe. Don't try to control the flow of images or thoughts. Try to detach yourself from what's going on and just become the observer. And whenever you're in doubt, just do as the Beatles song, turn off your mind, relax, and float downstream. Listen to your body. If you need to cry, you cry. If you need to vomit, you vomit. If you need to move, you move. You get the point. Just honor how you're feeling in the moment and express that. If you need to shout, or just let it move through you. And breathe. As I mentioned earlier, the breath can be a very powerful connector and anchor you back to yourself. Trust. This is maybe the biggest one. Trust that you're having the experience you're meant to be having. It might not make sense at the time, whatever you're going through, but in time, it all makes sense. So just trust that whatever have led you to where you are at this moment, you're always at the right place. And if you're having a difficult time and you're in a held ceremony, don't be afraid to ask the facilitators or guides for support. Integration. The work actually really begins after you've had your experience. The experience itself is just the beginning. It shows you what you need to work on, but then it's up to you to do the work afterwards. Integration is maybe the most important part of any psychedelic experience, because that's when the experience is turned to long-lasting change. Otherwise, it just becomes an experience and nothing more. We need to take that experience and actually make something of it. An experience gives you insights and invitations to changes and shifts, but unless you actively act on those insights, a lot of potential might be lost. In the afterglow of an experience, you have valuable time during which you're more mentally flexible to implementing practical, positive changes in your day-to-day life. What happens to a lot of people, and I've definitely been guilty of this myself, is that they have a psychedelic experience, and through that experience, they tap into the best version of themselves. But if we don't commit to introducing positive change, as time passes, old thought patterns and behaviors and routines start to re-emerge. For the first 5-6 years that I was taking psychedelics, I would use the psychedelic experience as a crutch to keep my depression and anxiety at bay. So I would have an experience that would lift me up for 2-3 months, but then I would feel the need to have another experience because my mental health would get worse again. So I would do these cycles, but not much would change in my life. And these cycles continued up until I had that experience with ayahuasca that I told you about in the beginning. After that experience, I was for a long time too mentally fragile to have a psychedelic experience. And I simply had to do the work because I had no other choice. I couldn't rely on this crutch that I had been. So I had to do the work and make the changes I needed to make in my life. And how to support integration is in many ways similar to how to support preparation. Make sure to allow time after the experience when you don't have any commitments, where you can spend time in nature, in stillness and alone if you need. And generally, the bigger the experience, the more time you'll need afterwards to process and integrate. Spend time in nature and then in stillness. Journal, create art, share your experience with trusted friends or therapists or coach. And this is important. Write down your insights and act on them. I had a client who had an experience with me in November, I think it was. And he had 3 main insights from that experience. And he wrote them all down. And one of the insights was that he was going to reach out to this friend that he had lost touch with, and he didn't really know why. But he was like, okay, I'm going to trust this instinct, I'm going to reach out to her. And yeah, to cut the long story short, he reached out, and through that experience, another thing that he had experienced in the ceremony, that he wanted to do more service work. Through these two things, they started working together in creating a school in Africa for young young kids or young girls who couldn't afford going to school. So they created a school in Africa to help to educate these people who couldn't afford it otherwise. And all of this just comes from him trusting his insights and actually taking action on the things that was brought up. Because at first he was like, why should I reach out to her? That doesn't make any sense. But then as we were kind of talking it through, he was like, okay, I'm going to reach out to her. It might sound weird to her, but I'm going to do it. So he sent her a message on LinkedIn, and yeah, now they're building a school in Africa. It's yeah. So if you decide to explore psychedelics, know that you have embarked on a journey of transformation. A journey to discover your potential and step into the best version of yourself. This journey is not for the average, but for the courageous. Walking the path of self-optimization means that you're ready to take a deep look at yourself and discover what is holding you back. It means that you might have to let go of parts of yourself that are no longer serving you. It means that things are about to change. So if you feel like you would like support and guidance on this journey, then maybe consider working with a coach like myself. I work with clients in many different ways and offer various coaching programs, from 1 month of microdosing optimization to several months of deep transformative immersion. I also arrange sacred ceremonies, retreats, and vision quest experiences in Ibiza, where I live. I've developed these programs from my own experience of working with these medicines for 10 years, experiencing everything from complete ecstasy to absolute hell, almost landing me in emergency psychiatric care. I've taken most all psychedelic substances known to man, from the smallest microdose to the highest completely ego-shattering heroic doses. From DJing high as a kite on the beaches of Goa to actually proposing to my wife while on acid, to pissing my pants in the middle of an ayahuasca ceremony in the Peruvian Amazon on our unconventional honeymoon. And by the way, even though it worked out fine for us, we're still happily married 4 years later, I don't recommend making big life decisions while on psychedelics. So anyway, I've created these programs to help you to get the transformation you desire without having to make the mistakes that I made during my journey. And as a coach, I'm there to help you go deep into yourself and exploring your motivations for working with psychedelics. I'm there to support you and guide you through the journey by providing specific recommendations and exercises based on your goals and experience, or simply be there for emotional and psychological support to help you navigate through any difficulties that arise. So please feel free to grab me afterwards for a chat if any of this sounds of interest to you. You can also reach out via WhatsApp or email.